We are anonymous. We are not your government. We are not your state media. We are not your obedient television generals, your think tank parrots, or your paid political performers. We are the voice that cuts through the theater, the propaganda, and the carefully staged lies. And today, Anonymous reveals what really happened after 2 U.S. warplanes were reportedly brought down by Iran. An F-15 Eagle variant, specifically an F-15E Strike Eagle, and an A-10 Warthog. In a moment that shattered the fantasy of total control and exposed, once again, the reckless arrogance of Donald Trump's war machine. One of the biggest headlines dominating the day was the reported downing of a U.S. F-15 over Iran. According to the original televised discussion, the White House had been receiving briefings all day, and Trump had been in contact with his national security team, while officials learned more about the situation. Then came the panel discussion. Retired Lieutenant General David Deptula and Heritage Foundation figure Victoria Coates were brought on to explain what happened, and what they said told a bigger story than they probably intended. The first point was simple and brutal. When a plane goes down in hostile territory and a crew ejects, the clock starts immediately. The first job is to establish the airman's location, confirm that the person is friendly, suppress threats in the area, and get rescue forces in and out before the enemy closes in. That is not a clean movie scene. That is one of the most dangerous and time-sensitive missions in modern warfare. Deptula laid out just how complex that rescue mission was. He said the HC-130J Combat King II played a critical role, coordinating the personnel recovery team and refueling the rescue helicopters. He identified those helicopters as HH-60W Jolly Green IIs. He said armed MQ-9, remotely piloted aircraft, were providing overwatch. He said an A-10 was conducting fire suppression against enemy forces who were also trying to search for the pilots. And he said at least one, F-35A, was overhead providing top cover while using its sensors to aid in the search and threat monitoring. In other words, this was not some controlled little operation where America was casually cleaning up the battlefield. This was a frantic, layered, high-risk rescue effort involving multiple aircraft and overlapping dangers, exactly the kind of scenario that exposes how fast triumphalist war messaging collapses when reality hits back. The U.S. Air Force describes the F-15E as a dual-role fighter with a 2-person crew, the A-10C as a close air support aircraft built for survivability, and the HC-130J as the Air Force's dedicated fixed-wing personnel recovery platform, which lines up with the rescue roles described in the original account. Then came the question about Nightfall over Iran. Would darkness help U.S. forces find their people? Deptula's answer was that U.S. sensors generally work better than an adversary's, and he said that was good news, especially because one crew member had already been recovered. He added that he felt pretty confident that good news would soon come about the second crew member as well. That optimism, though, sits beside something Trump and his loyal media ecosystem never want to admit. If your aircraft are falling out of the sky and your people are stranded on enemy ground, your war is not under control, no matter how many times the cameras are told to say otherwise. Public reporting on April 3rd and April 4th said one F-15E crew member had been rescued while the status of the second remained uncertain, and AP also reported that Iran claimed an A-10 was hit as the war entered a more dangerous phase. Then Victoria Coates stepped in and did what establishment war advocates always do: normalize the escalation, sanitize the risk, and try to reassure the audience that nothing fundamental had changed. She said she did not think this altered the overall trajectory of the war. She invoked a colleague from the Heritage Foundation who claimed that after 13,000 combat missions, this represented an Iranian success rate of 0.008%. She said one loss was too many, and she echoed the threat that if Iran harmed the missing American, it should abandon any illusions about what would happen next. Then she praised the campaign as enormously successful and said Trump would stick with his mission, ramp up the bombings, keep the door open, and demand what she framed as reasonable terms. No missiles, no nukes, no terrorist proxies. She painted a picture of a rebuilt and economically successful Iran if only its leadership complied. That is the language of imperial management dressed up as diplomacy. Bomb them harder, then call the terms reasonable. Destroy first, lecture second. That is not peace. That is coercion with a flag draped over it. AP reported that Trump said the shoot-downs would not change the negotiations, dismissing the losses with the line, "It's war," while also insisting U.S. forces would keep hitting Iran hard in the coming weeks. The Washington Post also reported that these losses came despite Trump's recent boasts about having achieved air superiority over Iran, and that is where Donald Trump deserves direct blame. Because this is what he always does. He sells danger as strength. He markets chaos as control. He turns other people's blood into his personal branding. He talks like a strong man, but behind that performance is the same old cowardly formula. Send young Americans into the fire, then use their suffering as a backdrop for political theater. When aircraft start going down, when rescue crews have to race into hostile territory, when missing service members become bargaining chips in a war zone, that is not evidence of strategic brilliance. That is evidence that a reckless man in power has decided other families can absorb the cost of his ego. Trump's instinct is never restraint. It is escalation, chest-thumping, and self-congratulation, even while reality disintegrates around him. The original discussion then shifted to broader claims about Iran's condition in the war. Coates argued that Iran was basically trying to survive, pointing to earlier attacks around the Gulf and to troubling reports that Iran was trying to recruit children as young as 12 to aid the war effort. She said this reflected a grim pattern dating back to the Iran-Iraq War, when children were used to trigger minefields, and she described that as a regime mindset built around martyrdom. She went on to argue that the deeper problem for Tehran was economic, mocking the idea that an extra $5 billion in oil sales could somehow save the system. Her argument was that Iran had structural math problems it could not fix, citing extreme currency weakness and suggesting systemic economic failure could follow once the fighting stopped. Whether one accepts all of her ideological framing or not, the key point is this: even voices defending Trump's war had to admit the conflict was dangerous, unstable, and capable of dragging the region deeper into collapse. AP reported that the war had already caused major casualties, deep humanitarian strain, and disruption to energy markets and Gulf infrastructure, showing that the consequences were regional, not surgical, and not contained. Then the conversation returned to the aircraft itself. Deptula said the early indications suggested the F-15E had been struck by an intermediate-range infrared missile. He noted that the F-15E has a complex and effective array of defensive systems, but admitted that there are still times when the enemy can surprise you. He said evasive action was likely taken, and countermeasures were probably deployed, but the aircraft was still hit. He again stressed that one of the two crew members had been rescued, and said the other would most likely be rescued as well. When asked whether it was common to recover one service member and not the other right away, he said it depended on context, including where they steered their parachutes, where they sought cover, and the specific conditions on the ground. He even suggested the second crew member may already have been picked up by that point. All of that matters, because it turns the story from a neat headline into what it really is: a chaotic chain of survival, separation, evasion, search patterns, suppression fire, aerial coordination, and desperate timing. This is what war looks like when the cameras can't sanitize it, and while the television framing tried to package all this as proof of American resolve, what it actually revealed was fragility. The mighty war machine had to scramble. The rescue architecture had to activate at full speed. An F-15E, a two-seat strike fighter built for day, night, and all-weather operations, was reportedly lost. An A-10, the aircraft built for brutal close support and survivability at low altitude, was also reportedly brought down or hit in the same wider escalation. The Pentagon publicly acknowledged being notified that an aircraft had been shot down while withholding many details. That is not the profile of a clean, dominant campaign. That is the profile of a widening conflict whose risks are outrunning its propaganda. So let's say it clearly. Trump is not a war leader. He is a salesman for catastrophe. He is the kind of man who mistakes escalation for competence, spectacle for strategy, and body counts for leverage. He talks about strength while making the world more combustible. He talks about winning while rescue teams hunt through darkness for the fallout of his decisions. And every time his supporters package this as toughness, remember what toughness actually looks like. It looks like the air crews, the rescue teams, the people doing the dangerous work after the politicians have finished performing for the cameras. They pay the price. Trump just monetizes the image. We are anonymous. We do not forget when power lies. We do not look away when war is sold like entertainment. And we do not excuse cowards in suits who gamble with human lives and call it leadership. If you want more truth without the propaganda, more exposure without the spin, and more accountability for the people who profit from chaos, stay here, speak out, and make sure this message reaches far beyond the walls of their media machine.